What is up, family? It's your boy D coming right back at you with another one. Right now, we're back in the lab and ports are on the menu. What is up, family? We back in the studio, and as you guys can see, we got type of ports here for you guys. We got the Aero versus the slot versus the vented, and as you can see down here in green, we also got a Kerf. All right, so let's jump right off into this. First runner-up is going to be the Aero port. The Aero port is probably the most recognized, the most easily recognized port that there is. I think it was one of the most original ports, and it's pretty much indicative of a tube, and that's pretty much it. You got an opening on one end, opening on the other end, certain diameter, certain length, and the pros and cons to this would be pretty much that the pro would be that with the smooth surface and a circular opening, you have minimized friction for airflow. You understand? So that means airflow is pretty much optimized. Sound pretty much travel the best, in my opinion, from an Aero port because of its shape and smoothness. Okay? One of the cons to an Aero port, if too small, chuffing or vent mock or port noise is very prevalent in Aero ports. In my experience, port noise can be more annoying coming out of an Aero port than in any other type of vent. But to be honest with you, or port I should say, but to be honest with you, any port, if not designed with enough height and width, in cases of the other types of port, is also going to have chuffing or vent mock, or what we would use for the rest of the video, which is considered port noise. So if not designed properly, you're going to get port noise anyway, but I think it's just more pronounced in an Aero port, and it's almost have like this echoey, it's kind of irritable to kind of hear it in Aero ports. I've actually in the past had that issue even when I had the proper diameter. It still had this weird sound to it, and you can get that if the material that you're using is too flimsy, too thin, and sometimes what you would have to do is to wrap the port itself with a second skin or some type of sound dampening material to keep that from happening. But moving on, what we're going to look at next is a few examples of what you will see with Aero ports. In this example, all the way to the left over here, you can see that this Aero port actually has two flare ends. So why would a manufacturer want to flare the end of an Aero port? It's all about airflow. With the port ends being flared, the air can more easily suck into and out of the pipe without making that chuffing or port noise that we was talking about previously. Minimizing port noise is pretty much the challenge here, right? I mean, you want that smooth, round area to go into and to go out of, and that's pretty much what the overall pro or benefit of having an Aero port is. Many people prefer an Aero port to any other port. And as you can see here, this one, like I said, had both ends flared, which is optimized. This is the optimal that you can get in terms of port, in my opinion. Here, some manufacturers, as you guys can see, would only flare one end of the port, and typically it's the port that is facing the outside. So you would see this on the outside, but actually on the inside, if you guys would tear open some of the prefab enclosures, you would see that the inside port is not flared. And I think they do that to simply cut costs. A flared port is not as expensive as a non-flared port is not as expensive as one that is flared. You guys can shop around and prove me on that one. But however, if anyone else know any other reason why a manufacturer would put one end flared and not flare the other, if you do know an answer to that other than what I've given, please leave a comment in the sections below. But for right now, we're going to be moving on. The next runner-up is going to be, and I shouldn't say the runner-up because this is not even given in the terms of importance, more so than what it is in terms of, I guess you can say what people are more familiar with, and that is the vented enclosure. And before I get to talking about the vented enclosure, I also want to point out the other type. I keep saying a vented enclosure. I mean a vented style port. I want to point out the slotted port. This is another style of port that is very commonly used. Not so much in my experience, by many manufacturers as it is by people who build custom enclosures. So there is a debate out, or some people would prefer to say that the vented port is the same as the slotted port, or some people are just confused at what is the difference between the two, and I'm going to get off into some of that right now. So if you were to look here at the slotted port, the slotted port actually has 4 walls of itself, meaning that it is independently built in itself. It does not need the assistance of any of the walls within the enclosure. Whereas with a vented port, it actually utilizes one of the walls of the enclosure that it is housed in. So what does this mean? What is the benefits of this? What is the pros and cons to this? Okay, so one of the benefits of this style of port would be the reduced cost in material, right? I mean, you actually didn't need to use wood to build another wall for this port right here. You just utilize what was already there. Unlike the slotted port, which does not utilize it, it has its own independent 4 walls. So what would be the downside to using this method opposed from using the slotted method? The slotted method, its pro is actually the downside or the con to the vented style. So with the slotted port independently having all 4 walls, that means that it allows air to flow in more directions than the vented enclosure does, meaning that the slot port actually allows air to flow in 4 directions, whereas the vented style one only has 1 direction in which the in which the air can flow in. I should say yes, I am going to stick with that 1 direction because it can only flow around this corner. That is it. This side right here is pretty much the only side that it can suck into and around, is this side right here. And the same thing over here. It can't do it from the top. If the top was on this, it still would be utilizing the top that you place on top of this enclosure as a wall. The same thing on the bottom. It is using the bottom of the enclosure as a wall, meaning that the airflow can only be optimized at one side of the vent. You see, at one side of the vent. But in the slotted port, with it allowing air to flow from all directions, to me, in my opinion, it is a more efficient design. Now, you guys can argue with that. I am all open for any comment that anyone has to make. Just leave it in the comment section below. I mean, I learn something from you guys all the time. I love the comment sections, and as you guys can see, I do try my best to get back to you guys when you do leave any comments. So please, if anyone have any other experience on that, or maybe can add a couple tips to what it is that I just said, I'm open for it. Please leave a comment in the sections below. But for right now, we're just going to be checking out the front part of the slotted port, and just pretty much to see what it is all about. Typically in the design of a slotted port, the face of the slotted port is typically wider in width and height than it is on its internals, because this portion is going to slide through the opening, and this face portion right here is pretty much where you're going to put your screws or fasteners and fasten it to the face or wall of the enclosure. So with that out of the way, we're going to be moving on to talk about the different types of slot ports that you may run into on someone else's design, or that you may want to design and utilize for yourself. Right here, we pretty much have what is a square or rectangular style port right here. This would be a slot port, and you will find this design also in vented ports as well. And sometimes what a manufacturer would do is they would simply take these two slot ports and stick them in the corners, pretty much just for styling and cosmetics purposes. They look good, you know, and that's pretty much what that is. Does this perform any differently than a slot port that would be positioned like this right here? In my opinion, no, it would not. The only difference is that this would be a dual design right here, which kind of accounts for, you have to take into some account that when you're doing a dual slotted or vented design, that you're going to have to kind of manipulate your measurements a little bit differently, because anytime you do dual, that does increase the surface area or the port area. So you gotta kind of like compensate for that by making the length double what it was. But this is not about measurements as much as it is about the cosmetics of a slotted port. And one of the most famous types of slotted ports that I've seen as of late, of course, would be the octaport. And some people would ask, like, is there really a difference between an octaport and an aerial port? Does an octaport trumps the aerial port? Does it have more benefit than the aerial port? And in my opinion, it doesn't. This is simply cosmetics. And always keep in mind that with all these different angles here, this thing got 8 walls in it. That means that this smooth surface right here is pretty much what you want. You want to get the surface as smooth as possible, and with the Aero port just having that naturally, there's no way that anything angled is going to outperform it. Not if you're talking in terms of diameter, the same diameter and the same length, same measurements. You put an Aero port up against a octaport any day of the week, the Aero port is going to sound better. That's just me and my opinion. It just make common sense, to be honest with you, and the math speaks for itself. But hey, again, that is up for debate. And if you guys have any other opinion than what I just said, leave it in the comment section below. I'm really curious about what someone else would have to say about that. But for right now, we're moving on. Up next is going to be the Kerf design. Now, to be honest with you, in my opinion, the Kerf design kind of gives you the best of two worlds. You pretty much have a vented style right here. This is vented, and it's pretty much have that smooth texture that an Aero port gives you, because it kind of eliminates the angles that, like, look at this over here. You see these sharp corners? Pretty much all you can do here is pretty much get a round over bit, and you can kind of give it a rounding to this sharp edge right here and round that over, but it can never get as efficient as this. Look how big that curve is. I mean, the airflow in here would be a lot more optimized than when you would ever get right here. It would be more indicative of that of an Aero port that you would get here. But again, the Aero port still trumps this right here, because you also have to keep in mind that you run right back into the same issue that you ran into back here with a vented enclosure or vented style port, which is the airflow only being able to whip around one corner. Okay, of course you can make it big enough, which is why they always require more port area, and you can still eliminate port noise, but however, look at the material that you're using opposed from the Aero port. So that's pretty much it. I love the Kerf. The Kerf is pretty much it's very stylish in my opinion. I mean, if you just go back and look at the curve right here, you can get some beautiful designs out of an enclosure, some very unique designs by using kerfs, and I really do like them and respect a good kerf build. But for right now, that's pretty much it. I don't want to make the video too long and too winded. I just wanted to know, like, what do you guys think? Oh yeah, another thing I wanted to run by you guys. Have anybody yet figured out what design that this enclosure is? That's what I want to know. Before I even tell you guys, if you feel like it, leave a comment right now if you think you know what design this enclosure is right now. I can give you this. It is a bandpass enclosure, but it's not a 4th order. We know that. It's not a 6th order, because the 6th order would just be this section right here. It's not an 8th order, because the 8th order would just be this section in back. So, and this is pretty much indicative of what would be considered a 10th order, if my memory serves me correct. This is a 10th order bandpass. But, hey, maybe some guys out there know better than me. I don't know. Or maybe I don't know. Maybe my memory don't serve me correctly. But I think being indicative of what? 4 chambers. So you have this chamber, that chamber. This is 2, this is 3, and this is 4. So essentially this would be a 10th order bandpass enclosure. But I don't know. Anybody else in the comment sections below, please leave some tips if you think that this is something else, or you think this design is crappy, or whatever the case may be. But anyway, that's enough of that right now. And don't beat me up too bad about this right here. I do know that this is not a optimized design. This was not built to any spec at all. I just did this for display purposes only. Yes, that port is too close to this port. I know that. But as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave a comment in the sections below. If you got something out of it and you feel like you got a friend or family member that can learn something from it, share the video, entertain someone else, leave a thumb up. And until next time, it's your boy D, and I'm out.